7 liquids have the ability to transmit impurities. Oil and water, conduits between the physical and the sacred. Blood and dew, the pulse of life and the essence of heaven. Milk and honey, sweetness and nutrition that hide secrets. The wine that defies understanding. And what does the Torah say about these 7 liquids?
Shalom, shalom. Welcome once again to your channel, Mishnah TV. This is journalist and researcher Abel Flores speaking. Today we open with a question implicit in the parashah we are studying this week. Tetzaveh. Can a simple liquid make something completely clean and pure? Because in the Parashat Tetzaveh we read several times about the purification of the altar and the kohanim, the priests. But these purifications were done with various liquids, not just water. But let's pause for a moment. We are not talking about stains. We are not talking about bacteria or hygiene. We are entering a meticulously designed spiritual system. In the Parashah of Tetzaveh, in the book of Exodus, the construction of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, begins. It is not simply a portable sanctuary in the desert. It is, if I may say so, a cosmic architecture. Every measurement, every metal, every fabric has precise spiritual implications. Nothing is decorative. Everything is functional in metaphysical terms. And yet, there's a detail that goes unnoticed. A seemingly technical detail that redefines our understanding of purity. Rabbinic tradition, based on the Mishnah and developed in the Talmud, teaches that there are 7 specific liquids capable of triggering susceptibility to ritual impurity. The key passage is found in Vayikra or Leviticus 11 verse 34 and is analyzed in the Mishnah. Tractate Maxerin 6, section 4. There, 7 are listed: mayim, water; yain, wine; shemen, olive oil; dam, blood; shalav, milk; tal, dew; and devash, honey. There are 7, not 6, not 8. And here the questions begin. Why these liquids and not others? Why water but not sand? Why wine but not any other alcoholic beverage? Why is olive oil kosher but not sunflower oil, for example? When the Torah speaks of impurity, it refers to states related to life and death. Contact with a corpse, for example, generates the most intense impurity. Why? Because death represents the absence of the life force that comes from God. It's not a moral failing. It's an existential condition. Now, I propose the following. If you stay until the end of the entire lesson, you will learn 3 fundamental things today. First, exactly which 7 liquids the Torah and tradition identify as transmitting impurity, with their precise textual basis and their correlation with biblical festivals and other specifics. After this, you will understand many things about kosher food, for example. Second, what the actual laws of transmission of impurity are according to Judaism, how it is activated, how it is transmitted, under what conditions it applies, and when it doesn't. Because not all contact generates impurity. The system is far more sophisticated than you might imagine, and some of it remains in effect to this day. And third, and here's one of the most misunderstood points, you'll grasp the precise difference between purification and atonement. These 2 concepts are often confused, but in Hebrew, they have distinct roots, distinct functions, and distinct spiritual processes. They are mentioned several times in the Parashat Tetzaveh, but are translated very poorly. This is Abel Flores, founder of Mishnah TV. Thank you so much for studying with us. I'd like to remind you that I will be personally responding to all the comments and questions you leave in the comments section of this video. I also invite you to visit our digital study center, lemishnah.com, where you'll find a wealth of material on Second Temple Judaism, Kabbalah, Judeo-Christianity, and our free Mishnah course in 2 versions, chapter by chapter, or with a summary of each tractate. Get comfortable. We're about to begin. We begin with the first of the 7 liquids, mayim, water. Water does not transmit impurity in itself, but modern intuition deceives us. We think of contamination, of dirt, of something that infects. But in biblical halakha, it doesn't work that way. Water does not automatically generate impurity. It does not contaminate. It does not defile spiritually. What it does is something much more technical and much more sophisticated. It enables. Of course, we are talking about pure water, spring water, not stagnant water, rainwater, natural water from a river or the sea, not stagnant water. The key concept is hesher l'tumah, literally, preparation to receive impurity. For food to become ritually impure, it must have had prior contact with one of the 7 liquids: water, wine, oil, blood, milk, dew, or honey, and that contact must have occurred with the owner's consent. Without that contact, the food does not enter the system. This completely transforms our understanding. Water is not a contaminant. It is a legal activator of susceptibility. The textual basis appears clearly in Leviticus 11, verse 38. But if water is put on the seed, it will be impure. Dry seed is not susceptible. Wet seed is. The difference is not moral. It is ontological. Water activates the possibility. Now, here arises an apparent paradox that is profoundly instructive. The very element that enables susceptibility to impurity is the primary means of purification. In Leviticus 15, immersion in the mikveh is described. In Exodus 29, verse 4, the purification of the priest before their consecration is described. In numerous cases of ritual impurity, restoration occurs through water. So water can activate vulnerability and restore purity. A contradiction? No. A legal context. The Torah does not operate with emotional categories. It operates with legal and ontological structures. Water is neither good nor bad. It is malleable. It is the most flexible element in the system. And this is no coincidence. Let's return to the beginning. In Genesis 1 verse 2 we read, "And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters." Water precedes the organization of the world. Before there is form, there is water. In biblical cosmology, water represents primordial potential, matter yet undifferentiated, a state prior to structure. That is why it can alter spiritual states. It is the most plastic element of creation. When we speak of purification, we use the word Taharah. Immersion in natural water removes the state of impurity, but not just any water. Jewish law, halakha, requires strict conditions: naturally occurring water, a minimum of 40 seah, not artificially transported. The mikveh must contain water with a natural continuity. This is not a technical detail. It reinforces a central idea. The purifying water must represent the continuity of creation. It cannot be water disconnected from its source. Purification requires reconnection to the original flow. Now let's move on to the festive dimension. The festival directly linked to water is Sukkot, from the 15th to the 21st of Tishrei. During the Second Temple period, an extraordinary ritual was performed, Simchat Beit HaShuvah, the celebration of the drawing of water, described in the Talmud, Tractate Sukkah 48b. Water was brought from the pool of Shiloah and poured onto the altar along with the sacrifice. The written Torah doesn't explicitly mention it, but oral tradition preserves it as a received practice. Why so much emphasis on water? The Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah 1:2 teaches that on Sukkot the world is judged with regard to water. Sukkot marks the beginning of the rainy season in the land of Israel. Water symbolizes agricultural blessing, annual renewal, and collective survival. In Deuteronomy 11 verses 11 to 12, we are reminded that the land of Israel depends directly on rain. It is not like Egypt, irrigated by a predictable river. It depends on the heavens. It depends on the flow. Without water, there is no life. Without rain, there is no blessing. Even on Yom Kippur, we find this duality. Although the annual purification of the altar is performed with blood, as in Exodus 30 verse 10, the high priest performs multiple immersions in water during the service described in Leviticus 16. Here we see the structural difference. Blood produces Kaparah, atonement. It repairs the legal relationship with God. It neutralizes guilt. Water produces Taharah. It eliminates a state. Water cleanses the ontological state. Blood repairs the legal relationship. They are not interchangeable. In the Kabbalistic dimension, water is associated with the Sephirah of Chesed, expansion, and mercy. It is the downward flow of divine energy. Ritual impurity is not moral evil. It is a blockage of spiritual flow. Water restores that flow. And now we understand something profoundly existential. Water doesn't inherently transmit impurity. It activates susceptibility. Life makes us vulnerable. When something is completely dry, isolated, disconnected, it doesn't enter the system. But when there is moisture, when there is openness, when there is contact with flow, then it can be transformed. In spiritual terms, only that which is alive can change. And that is why, paradoxically, the very element that makes us susceptible is the one that can restore us. Water teaches us that biblical spirituality is not simplistic moralism. It is an architecture of states. It is flow, continuity, and context. And perhaps the most profound lesson is this: do not fear the vulnerability that water brings, because that which can become susceptible can also become pure again. Now we turn to the second of the 7 liquids. There is one liquid that the Torah treats with almost overwhelming seriousness, and it is not water. It is blood, dam in Hebrew. Blood appears in the Talmudic list of the 7 liquids that enable susceptibility to impurity, as the Mishnah teaches in Maksharin 6:4, derived from Leviticus 11 verses 34 to 38. In this technical framework, blood can prepare food to eventually contract ritual impurity. But if we stop there, we have understood nothing. Because, unlike water, blood is not merely a legal enabler. Blood is the axis of biblical atonement. It is the most legally charged liquid in the entire Torah. The fundamental statement appears in Vayikra 17:11. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and it is the blood that makes atonement for life. There is no poetic metaphor here. Blood does not symbolize life. Blood is the legal carrier of life. That is why the prohibition of consuming blood in Vayikra 17:10 is absolute. It is not a minor dietary rule. It is an ontological limit. Ingesting blood would be to improperly appropriate life that belongs to God. Within the technical framework of the 7 liquids, blood can enable susceptibility to impurity. But in the temple system, its primary function is another word, Kaparah, atonement. Here we must establish a radical difference. Water produces Taharah. It purifies a state. Blood produces Kaparah. It repairs a legal breach between humankind and God. Blood does not remove ritual impurity. Blood repairs guilt within the covenant. Let's look at a concrete example. In Exodus 29, during the priestly consecration, the blood of the sacrifice is placed on the right earlobe, right thumb, and right big toe of Aaron and his sons. This gesture is not hygienic. It is not decorative symbolism. It is a transfer of life. Ear, obedience. Hand, action. Foot, existential direction. Blood consecrates. It transforms the priest into a functional instrument of the sanctuary. The culmination of this theology occurs in Leviticus 16, the Yom Kippur service. The high priest sacrifices a bull for himself and a goat for the people. He then enters the Holy of Holies and sprinkles the blood on the mercy seat, the Kaparah. This occurs only on the 10th of Tishrei. The blood there does not physically cleanse anything. It does not remove material filth or impurity. It restores spiritual legal balance. It is cosmic reconciliation. In Leviticus 16 verse 30 we read, "For on this day he will make atonement for you, to cleanse you." Notice the sequence. First Kaparah, then Taharah as a result. The blood initiates the process. In the biblical system, sin is not merely an emotional failing. It is a covenant breach. The blood functions as a substitute compensation, a legal transfer of responsibility, and a restoration of the covenant order. Nachmanides, the Ramban, explains that the sacrifice symbolically represents the offerer. What happens to the animal should happen to the sinner. The blood acts as a substitute vehicle. Ontologically, blood belongs to the level of nefesh, the basic life force. That is why shedding innocent blood is the most serious crime. That is why, in Genesis 4 verse 10, Abel's blood cries out from the ground. Blood has spiritual agency. In Kabbalistic literature, blood is associated with gevura, judgment, and severity. Water corresponds to chesed, mercy, and expansion. Yom Kippur is the day when judgment and mercy converge. Blood allows judgment not to destroy. It channels it. It structures it. But we must be rigorous. Not all blood atones. Only the blood of a permitted animal, sacrificed according to the law, offered on the altar, and handled by an authorized priest within the institutional framework of the temple. Outside of that framework, blood does not atone. The system is strictly institutional. It is legal, not magical. And here we arrive at a delicate theological implication. Atonement does not occur solely through internal emotion. It is not merely subjective repentance. In the original biblical model, Kaparah occurs within a ritual system with an altar and blood. After the destruction of the Second Temple, Rabbinic Judaism developed substitutes: prayer, teshuvah, charity. The Talmud teaches that words can replace bulls. But the foundational model is sacrificial. Blood is life offered to repair a rupture. And here lies the profound lesson. If water teaches us vulnerability and purification of state, blood teaches us covenantal responsibility. It reminds us that life is not autonomous. It belongs to God. And when the relationship is fractured, it is not enough to feel. Restoration is necessary. Blood, in the Torah, is not ritual violence. It is the radical assertion that life is sacred, so sacred that it can only be used for reconciliation. And that, in a world that trivializes human life, is an uncomfortably relevant lesson. Now we move on to the third liquid, and it's one that doesn't cleanse like water, doesn't atone like blood, but elevates. In Hebrew, shemen, oil. And when we understand its function in the Torah, we grasp something essential about leadership, light, and purpose. In the halakhic framework, olive oil appears on the list of the 7 liquids that enable susceptibility to impurity, as the Mishnah teaches in Maxerin 6:4, based on Leviticus 11 verse 34. Technically, it can prepare food to contract impurity. It can alter ritual status. But that's just the basic level, because unlike water and blood, oil acquires an additional and higher function: to consecrate. Its first significant appearance occurs in Parashat Tetzaveh, Shemet 27:20, and they will bring you pure pressed olive oil for the luminary to raise continuous light. It is not common fuel. It must be pure, pressing, no waste. Shemen zait zaj kadet. The oil here does not transmit impurity, transmits light, and that already gives us a clue. The oil in the Torah is not simply fatty matter. It is refined matter that produces clarity. Then, in Shemet 30:22, 33, the anointing oil appears, composed of myrrh, cinnamon, calamus, cassia, and olive oil. Its function is not to cleanse or atone. It is to consecrate. The Mishkan is anointed. The utensils are anointed. Aaron and his sons are anointed. In Shemet 29:7 we read, "And you will pour it on his head." From that moment on, Aaron is not simply Aaron. It's Cohen Gadol, not for personal merit, not because of inner emotion. By ritual act, oil establishes legal identity. Here we must pause and compare. Water produces Taharah, purification of status. Blood produces Kaparah, reparation of guilt. Oil produces Kedusha, consecration. It does not cleanse what is unclean. It does not repair what is broken. It elevates what is already fit. And that is why it is linked to royalty. In 1 Samuel 16 verse 13, the prophet anoints David. The word Messiah literally means anointed one. Without oil, there is no formal investiture. There is no dynastic legitimacy. Oil is not associated with sin. It is associated with leadership. While blood repairs faults, oil establishes mission. Now let's move on with the story. There is a holiday whose heart is oil, Hanukkah. Although it doesn't belong to the written Torah, its core is profoundly biblical in symbolism. The central miracle wasn't military. It was the pure oil that burned for 8 days in the rededicated temple. Oil represents restored purity, light that is never extinguished, continuity of the covenant. Sukkot corresponds to water, Yom Kippur to blood, Hanukkah to oil. In the mystical dimension, the sages observe something fascinating. Water flows, blood circulates, oil floats. It doesn't mix with water. It symbolizes a wisdom that isn't diluted by the material. That's why in the Kabbalistic tradition, it's associated with chakma, primordial wisdom. Oil illuminates when it burns. It heals when it's applied. It consecrates when it's poured. And it floats above the dense. It is the liquid with the greatest positive symbolism in the Torah. But we must be precise. Not all oil consecrates. The anointing oil had a specific formula, and it was forbidden to reproduce it for personal use, as Exodus 30 verses 32 to 33 warns. It was exclusive. Common oil can enable susceptibility to impurity. Sacred oil transforms spiritual identity. And here lies the profound teaching. Water teaches us vulnerability. Blood teaches us responsibility. Oil teaches us purpose. One restores status. Another repairs relationships. The third designates a mission. Oil doesn't deal with what failed. It deals with what can become. And perhaps that is the most powerful lesson for our contemporary life. It is not enough to be clean. It is not enough to be forgiven. The final question is, are we consecrated? Are we living as instruments of light? Because if water cleanses and blood reconciles, oil elevates. Now we move on to the fourth liquid, and it is a liquid that not only participates in the ritual system, but also touches human consciousness. In Hebrew, yain, wine. In the halakhic framework, wine is among the Shiva Mashgim, the 7 liquids that enable susceptibility to ritual impurity, as the Mishnah teaches in Maksharan 6:4, derived from Leviticus 11 verses 34 to 38. Like the other liquids, it does not automatically generate impurity. It does not contaminate on its own. It enables a food to become impure if there was contact and consent. But unlike water, blood, and oil, wine introduces an additional dimension. It transforms consciousness and also intoxicates. Its first significant appearance occurs in Genesis 9 verses 20 to 21. Noah plants a vineyard. The first farmer after the flood does not sow wheat, he plants grapevines. From the beginning, wine has been associated with civilization, vulnerability, and the revelation of the hidden. Wine exposes. It doesn't just bring joy, it reveals. In the temple, wine fulfills a precise function, the libation nesek. In Exodus 29 verse 40, it is commanded that a quarter of a hin of wine be poured along with the daily sacrifice. Blood atones. Wine accompanies. Blood repairs the relationship. Wine celebrates the relationship. It is not poured randomly. It is poured with exact measure, along with the korban tamid. Life is offered in blood. Joy is offered in wine. In the legal dimension, wine can create a susceptibility to impurity if it is in a liquid state and there was consent to its use. But its deepest meaning is not technical. It is symbolic and covenantal. In Judaism, wine is the central element of Kiddush on Shabbat and holidays, of weddings, and of Brit Milah. Every formal sanctification ritual begins with wine. Kiddush signifies separation for the sacred. Wine marks the threshold between the everyday and the consecrated. And it reaches its highest expression on Passover. During the Seder, 4 cups of wine are drunk, corresponding to the 4 expressions of redemption in Exodus 6 verses 6 to 7. I will bring them out. I will deliver them. I will redeem them. I will take them. Now, wine does not purify or atone on Passover. It commemorates redemption. Water prepares. Blood atones. Oil consecrates. Wine celebrates liberation. In Psalms 104 verse 15 we read, "Wine gladdens the heart of man." But the Talmud, in Eruvin 65a, adds a penetrating observation. When wine enters, the secret comes out. Wine reveals inner life. In mystical terms, water is associated with chesed, blood with gevura, and oil with chakma. Wine corresponds to bina, expanded understanding. It is not abstract wisdom. It is processed, fermented consciousness. And here is the profound symbol. Wine is not born wine. It is grapes transformed by time and fermentation. It represents historical process. It is no coincidence that the prophet Isaiah, in 25:6, describes the messianic banquet with aged, refined wine. Wine symbolizes the culmination of history, the maturation of divine purpose. But there is a warning. Proverbs 20 verse 1 says, "Wine is a mocker. It is double-edged. It can sanctify. It can degrade. Its power depends on the context. Within the covenant, it elevates. Outside the context, it destabilizes. And here we see its structural difference. Water removes impurity. Blood restores covenant. Oil bestows authority. Wine elevates consciousness. It does not cleanse or repair guilt. It expands perception. And perhaps that is its most relevant teaching. Spirituality is not only purity nor only reparation. It is also disciplined joy. It is celebrating within limits. It is allowing consciousness to rise without losing sight of the context. Wine reminds us that the covenant is not only duty. It is celebration, because a Judaism without joy withers, and joy without covenant overflows. Wine, when in its proper place, transforms history into a banquet, and that, properly understood, is revelation. There is a liquid that does not burn like oil, does not intoxicate like wine, does not atone like blood, does not purify like water. And yet, without it, there is no beginning. Jalaf, milk. In the halakhic framework, milk is among the Shiva Mashgim, the 7 liquids that enable susceptibility to ritual impurity, as the Mishnah teaches in Maksharin 6:4. Technically, it functions like the others. It does not automatically transmit impurity, but it can enable a food to contract it if there was intentional contact. But unlike blood, oil, or wine, milk is not central to the temple service. Its significance is structural, not sacrificial. From a biological perspective, milk is the first food for human beings. It is a substance produced to nourish new life. It is food prior to all autonomy, and that is key. Milk symbolizes dependence and growth. No covenant, no atonement, no judgment, nourishment. The most repeated expression about the land of Israel is a land flowing with milk and honey, as in Exodus 3 verse 8 and Deuteronomy 26 verse 9. It is not an abstract mystical metaphor. It is a concrete agricultural description: healthy livestock, abundant pastures, productive prosperity. Milk is a sign of economic blessing and demographic stability. Let's compare structurally. Water purifies status. Blood repairs relationships. Oil consecrates authority. Wine elevates consciousness. Milk sustains growth. Milk does not transform legally. It sustains biologically. But there is a commandment that gives it a profound ethical dimension. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. Repeated in Exodus 23:19, 34:26, and Deuteronomy 14 verse 21. Here, milk, a symbol of potential life, cannot be mixed with meat, a symbol of death. Many commentators explain that the Torah rejects a pagan fertility practice. Milk must not become an instrument of symbolic violence.
It is a moral boundary regarding nutrition. Note something revealing. Milk is not poured on the altar. It is not used for anointing. It is not used for atonement. It belongs to the everyday realm, not the sanctuary. And that is profoundly theological.
Milk represents the sanctity of the ordinary, silent formation, not ritual drama. That is why tradition associates milk with Shavuot, the festival of the giving of the Torah. It is customary to consume dairy products. Why? Some explain that the Torah is compared to milk, as in Shir HaShirim 4:11. Others point out that Israel, upon receiving the Torah, did not yet have kosher utensils for meat. But on a deeper level, Shavuot is the spiritual birth of Israel. Milk symbolizes the initial stage of formation. In Jewish mysticism, milk is associated with chesed in its maternal dimension. It is not abstract expansion like water. It is mercy applied to nourishment. Water is general potential. Milk is personalized nourishment. Every ancient society understood milk as a sign of fertility and generational continuity. A land flowing with milk is a land where the future is guaranteed. And here is the lesson. Spirituality does not begin with ecstasy or sacrifice. It begins with nourishment. Before atonement, one must grow. Before consecration, one must be formed. Before leadership, one must be nourished. Milk does not atone. It does not purify. It does not consecrate. It forms. If water cleanses, blood reconciles, oil elevates, wine sanctifies, milk sustains, and makes one grow. And perhaps that is its most silent teaching. No revelation is possible without prior nourishment. No mission can be sustained without formation. The extraordinary begins in the elemental. And spiritual life, like biological life, always begins with milk. Now, there is a liquid that doesn't fall with a crash, doesn't spill on the altar, doesn't anoint kings or intoxicate consciences. It is barely perceptible. In Hebrew, tal, dew. In the halakhic framework, dew is among the 7 liquids that can cause ritual impurity, as the Mishnah teaches in Maksharin 6:4. Technically, it functions like the others. It doesn't transmit impurity on its own, but it can make food susceptible to it if there was voluntary contact and acceptance by the owner. But here its uniqueness appears. Unlike rainwater, dew doesn't depend on human intervention. It isn't collected with effort. It isn't invoked with agricultural ritual. It descends. Silently. The Torah distinguishes between match, rain, and tal, dew. In Deuteronomy 11 verses 13 to 17, rain depends on the spiritual merit of the people. If there is faithfulness to the covenant, there is rain. If not, it is withheld. But the Talmud, in Tanit 3a, teaches something surprising. God can withhold rain, but not dew. Dew never ceases. It represents unconditional blessing. Its first significant appearance is in Isaac's blessing to Jacob. In Genesis 27 verse 28, "May God give you of the dew of heaven." Notice the order. First the dew, then the fatness of the earth. Dew symbolizes subtle yet constant provision. In the geography of Israel, especially in semi-arid climates, nighttime, dew can be vital when there is no rain. It is not spectacular. It doesn't flood, but it preserves life. On a ritual level, if dew falls on food and the owner accepts that moisture, it can create a susceptibility to impurity. Even the most subtle act can trigger legal status. But its deepest dimension is neither agricultural nor halakhic. It is eschatological. In Jewish liturgy, the prayer for dew, tefillat tau, is introduced on the first day of Passover. From Passover until Sukkot, the Amidah mentions dew instead of rain. Why? Because Passover marks spring, rebirth, and dew is associated with something even greater, resurrection. In Isaiah 26 verse 19 we read, "Your dew is the dew of light." The Talmud, in Ketubah 111b, interprets dew as the agent of future resurrection, the so-called Tau Techia, the dew of life. Water purifies, blood atones, oil consecrates, wine sanctifies, milk nourishes, dew revives. It is the only one of the 7 liquids directly linked to future life. In Jewish mysticism, dew is associated with Keter, the highest divine will. It does not depend on human merit. It does not respond to calculation. It descends by pure grace. And here lies a radical theological teaching. Rain can be suspended by judgment. Dew cannot. Even when there is judgment, even when history seems dry, there is a minimum of vital flow that is never interrupted. That flow is dew. When Jacob dreams of the ladder in Genesis 28, heaven and earth are connected. Dew symbolizes that constant vertical connection. It is not a storm. It is gentle contact. Persistent. In structural terms, water requires action. Blood requires sacrifice. Oil requires anointing. Wine requires pouring out. Milk requires motherhood. Dew does not depend on man. It descends. And perhaps that is its most comforting message. Not every blessing is the result of merit. Not every renewal is the fruit of effort. There are moments when life is sustained by silent grace. Dew teaches us that even when judgment falls, even when the rain is withheld, the sky does not completely disconnect from the earth. There is always a thread. There is always a minimal moisture that preserves the possibility of living again. And that, in spiritual terms, is structural hope. Now, we come to the 7th liquid, and it's one that closes the list, but opens a paradox. In Hebrew, it's devash, honey. In the halakhic framework, honey is among the Shiva mashkim, the 7 liquids that enable susceptibility to ritual impurity, as the Mishnah teaches in Maksharin 6:4. Technically, it functions like the others. It doesn't transmit impurity on its own, but it can enable a food to become impure if there was intentional contact. So far, nothing surprising. But honey introduces a unique theological tension. It's a symbol of blessing, and it's forbidden on the altar. First, let's clarify something important. In most biblical contexts, doesn't necessarily mean honey from bees. In the ancient world, it usually refers to thick date syrup, a typical agricultural product of the land of Israel. It's not a staple food like milk. It's concentration. It's intensified sweetness. When the Torah describes the promised land as a land flowing with milk and honey, Exodus 3 verse 8, Deuteronomy 26 verse 9, it is not speaking of ethereal metaphors. It is speaking of concrete economics. Milk signifies healthy livestock. Honey signifies thriving crops. Together, they describe overall stability. So, if honey symbolizes prosperity and blessing, why is it forbidden on the altar? Leviticus 2 verse 11 declares, "For you must not burn leaven or honey as an offering made by fire to God." Herein lies the problem. How can something that symbolizes abundance be unsuitable for the most sacred space? Commentators offer various explanations. Some point out that honey, when heated, ferments, or spoils. The altar requires stable, non-fermenting substances. Others explain that the altar is a place of judgment and atonement. Unbalanced sweetness is not appropriate for that space. The altar is not a banquet. It is a tribunal. A deeper reading distinguishes between natural life and formal worship. Honey belongs to the agricultural and human realm, not to the direct sacrificial space. Let's compare them structurally. Water purifies one's state. Blood repairs relationships. Oil consecrates authority. Wine sanctifies covenants. Milk nourishes growth. Dew revives by grace. Honey symbolizes earthly abundance. Honey doesn't operate on the altar. It operates in the earth. And yet, the Torah compares the divine word to honey. In Psalms 19 verse 10, sweeter than honey. And in Ezekiel 3 verse 3, the prophet describes the divine scroll as sweet in his mouth. Honey symbolizes the pleasurable experience of revelation. But pleasure is not atonement. And here another fascinating dimension emerges. Although honey is forbidden on the altar, it occupies a central place on Rosh Hashanah. We dip apples in honey and pray, "May we have a sweet year." Rosh Hashanah is a day of judgment. Honey introduces the plea for the sweetening of judgment. Let's observe the paradox. On the altar, honey is forbidden. On the table of judgment, it is central. Why? Because the altar represents the legal framework of our relationship with God. Honey represents the enjoyment of divine blessing. They are distinct levels. In Jewish mysticism, honey symbolizes the transformation of judgment into sweetness. The bee produces honey, but it also has a stinger. Judgment and sweetness coexist. True sweetness does not eliminate judgment. It transforms it. And here is the final teaching. Biblical spirituality is not hedonistic. Not everything sweet is suitable for the altar. The altar demands structure, truth, and confrontation. Sweetness belongs to the outcome, not the process. We have journeyed through the 7 liquids. Water cleanses. Blood reconciles. Oil elevates. Wine sanctifies. Milk sustains. Dew revives. Honey sweetens. Honey closes the list, reminding us that the goal of the spiritual life is not merely purity or simply redemption, but blessing properly enjoyed. But order matters. First structure, then sweetness. First altar, then table. And when we understand this, we realize that the Torah does not deny pleasure. It places it within its proper context. Because true sweetness is not escapism. It is the fruit of a well-ordered relationship. Now we're going to answer the second question we promised in the introduction to this video. What are the laws governing the transmission of impurities according to the Torah and Judaism? And here's a misconception we need to clear up from the start. When the Torah speaks of tumah, impurity, it's not talking about sin. It's not talking about immorality. It's not talking about dirt. It's talking about a legal ritual status. And this is fundamental. Ritual impurity isn't an ethical category. It's a legal category within a structured system. It operates with strict rules, defined limits, and precise hierarchies. It's not biological contagion. It's not primitive superstition. It's spiritual legislation. Purity, in Hebrew, Taharah, is also not a mystical aura that is transmitted like invisible energy. Purity is not contagious. Impurity can indeed be transmitted, but only within a hierarchical system clearly defined by the Torah and elaborated in the Mishnah, especially in the order known as Seder Taharah. The Torah establishes an architecture, and like any architecture, it has foundations. The primary sources of impurity are called avat hatumah, literally parents of impurity. They are the original categories, the starting points of the system. Among them are the human corpse, described in Numbers 19, the sherets, certain dead animals listed in Leviticus 11 verses 29 to 38, the niddah in Leviticus 15, the zav and zava, also in Leviticus 15, the zeret in Leviticus 13 to 14, the nevila, an animal that died without a valid sacrifice. Each one has different rules, different durations, different purification processes, but there is one that stands out above all others. The human corpse is the most severe source. Why? Because the most intense tumah is associated with human death, not with moral failing, but with the ultimate interruption of life. The Torah does not demonize the body. It recognizes that death creates a radical dissonance with the source of life, which is God. The greater the potential life, the greater the impact of its absence. Impurity is not a punishment. It is an ontological consequence of contact with death. And here we must understand something sophisticated. Impurity is transmitted in levels. A parent of impurity can generate a first degree, which can generate a second degree, and so on, with specific limitations. Not everything is transmitted to everything. Not every contact generates a state. It is a hierarchical system. For example, direct contact with a corpse generates the highest level of impurity, which can only be purified through the ritual of the red heifer described in Numbers 19. There is no substitute. There is no shortcut. But an object that touched someone who touched a corpse does not have the same status. The intensity is lessened. This demonstrates that Tumah is not chaotic contamination. It is a mathematical structure. So what unites these primary sources? They are all related to life and its disruption. Human death, animal death, loss of reproductive potential, bodily fluids that represent unrealized life, illness that symbolizes a rupture of integrity. The Tumah appears where there is friction between life and its interruption. And this leads us to a crucial conclusion. Ritual impurity is not sin. A woman in a state of niddah has not committed a transgression. A person who buried their father has not done anything wrong. On the contrary, they have fulfilled a mitzvah, but they have come into contact with the dimension of death or vital vulnerability. And the Mishkan, and later the temple, represent the highest intensity of divine life. To enter there requires ritual synchronicity. The Tumah does not morally disqualify. It regulates access. This completely changes the modern perception. In our culture, purity and impurity sound like moralism. In the Torah, these are technical categories within a system that protects the sanctity of sacred space. Purity is not ethical superiority. Impurity is not shame. They are states of being, and states of being require processes. Understanding this frees us from centuries of misunderstanding. It allows us to read the Torah with legal precision and theological sensitivity. The Tumah reminds us that life is sacred. The Taharah reminds us that states of being can be transformed. And this balance between structure and possibility is the heart of the system. Now we enter one of the most technical and most elegant aspects of the system. Ritual impurity is not chaotic. It doesn't spread like an uncontrolled epidemic. It operates hierarchically. And the fundamental rule is this: the system is hierarchical. Impurity loses intensity at each level. It doesn't increase. It doesn't expand indefinitely. It weakens. At the top of the structure, we find what tradition calls Avi Avad HaTumah, the father of fathers of impurity. The classic example is the human corpse, described in Numbers 19. It is the most severe source because it represents the ultimate disruption of human life. There is no higher level within the system. Whoever comes into direct contact with a corpse becomes Avi HaTumah, father of impurity. It's the second level, but it's still extremely potent. Now observe the logic. Contact with the ultimate source doesn't put the individual in the same category as a corpse. The intensity decreases by one level. Then, an object or food that comes into contact with an Avi HaTumah becomes Rishon L'Tumah, the first derived level. If something comes into contact with that Rishon, it can become Sheni L'Tumah, the second level. And here we already see the pattern. Each transmission reduces the intensity. In certain specific contexts, especially in relation to sacred foods, such as the terumah or temple offerings, there are additional levels. Shlishi, the highest level, and Revi'ai, the lowest level. But these deeper levels do not apply universally. They only operate within specific sacred categories. And here is the crucial point. Transmission is not infinite. Not everything can transmit to everything. Not everything can receive at every level. Not everything continues indefinitely. The system stops according to the category of the object involved. For example, in the realm of the profane, transmission generally stops at Sheni. In the realm of Terumah, it can reach Shlishi. In the most sacred, such as certain sacrifices, it can reach Revi'ai. It is a system with precise limits. And this reveals something profoundly theological. The Tumah is not an autonomous force that competes with God. It is not uncontrolled dark energy. It is contained within rules. It is limited. It is structured. Even impurity obeys law. Furthermore, the system is asymmetrical. Impurity is transmitted. Purity is not transmitted by contagion. Taharah does not jump from a pure object to an impure one. Purity is acquired through process. Impurity is transmitted through regulated contact. This tells us something about the human condition. It is easier to lose a state than to acquire it, but even loss is limited. The fact that impurity diminishes at each level introduces an idea of structural hope. Distance weakens intensity. The farther we are from the original source, the lesser the impact. And here a powerful image emerges. The human corpse is avi avad hatuma. It represents the ultimate confrontation with death. But even from there, the system does not allow for infinite expansion. Death does not dominate the system. It is contained within it. The decreasing hierarchy is a silent theological statement. Life is stronger than death. Impurity weakens with each transmission. In modern terms, we could say that the Torah designed a model of spiritual containment. Not paranoia, not permanent isolation. There are rules. There are limits. There is restoration.
And that is essential to understand, because when we read these laws without understanding their hierarchical structure, they seem obsessive. When we understand the hierarchy, they reveal a precise architecture that protects sacred space without demonizing everyday life. Impurity has levels. It has boundaries. It has an end. And where something has an end, there is a possibility of return.
That is the mathematical beauty of the system. Now we delve into the mechanics. Not the metaphor, not the symbol, the system's engineering. Ritual impurity is transmitted through three main pathways. The first is mega, direct contact. If a person or object touches a source of impurity, they can become impure. Classic example, a person touches a human corpse. They become avi hatuma, unclean. If they touch a dead, impure animal, they remain impure until nightfall. It's direct. It's physical. It's regulated. The second pathway is masa, carrying. Here, something more sophisticated occurs. Some impurities are transmitted even without direct contact, if the object is carried. One who carries a dead animal can become impure even without directly touching the flesh. The act of carrying implies participation. The third pathway is ohel, under the same roof. And this is exclusive to impurity from a human corpse. If a corpse is found in an enclosed space, everything under that roof can become impure, even without physical contact. This is the most severe and complex mechanism. Human death alters the space itself. But here we must introduce another fundamental rule. Not everything can become impure. The following can become impure: people, movable utensils, prepared food, and liquids. The following cannot become impure: soil fixed to the ground, natural water at its source, and elements permanently connected to the ground. The principle is clear. Only what is separated from the ground can become susceptible. Permanent connection to the ground protects. Now, in the case of solid food, there is a prerequisite, hesher lutuma. Food cannot become impure until it has been in contact with one of the 7 liquids: water, blood, oil, wine, milk, dew, or honey, with the owner's consent. Without this prerequisite, it is not susceptible. Let's look at an example of chain transmission. A corpse is avi avad hatuma. A person touches it and becomes avi hatuma. That person touches bread. The bread becomes rishon lutuma. That bread touches teruma. The teruma can become sheni. The chain stops according to the category. It is not an infinite expansion. It is a closed system. It also varies according to the object. People can become avi or rishon, and they require mikveh, waiting until nightfall, and, in certain cases, a sacrifice. Now, the utensils depend on the material. Metal can be purified by immersion. Wood too. Ceramics, if they become impure, must be broken. The material matters legally. Food only reaches certain levels and does not generate unlimited transmission. And how does transmission stop? When the object is no longer susceptible. When the level cannot generate a lower one. When proper purification is performed. When the required time has elapsed. It is not infinite contagion. It is controlled architecture. Each type of impurity has its method of purification. Contact with a corpse. Water mixed with the ashes of the red heifer. Light contact, mikveh and sunset. Nida, counting, and mikveh. Utensils, immersion or breaking. Purification depends on the origin. And here is the central theological principle. The ultimate source of impurity is death. The ultimate source of purity is living water. Life means proximity to the sacred. Death means temporary restriction of access. During the temple period, ritual purity was mandatory for entry. Priests maintained strict purity. Sacred foods required absolute control. After the destruction of the Second Temple, most of these laws were suspended in practical application, but they remain in force in theory. And now, a crucial distinction. Impurity is transmitted mechanically according to objective rules. Sin is not transmitted through physical contact. No one becomes a sinner by touching another. That is a radical legal difference. The system is not designed to generate an obsession with cleanliness. It is designed to structure access to the sacred, differentiate spaces, order spiritual hierarchies, and protect the sanctuary.
Purity is a condition of access, not a condition of virtue. And when we understand that, we stop reading these laws as ancient superstition and begin to see them for what they truly are.
A precise architecture that regulates the encounter between the human and the divine. There are two words that are often confused, and this confusion distorts the entire understanding of the biblical system. Taharah and Kaparah, purification and atonement. They are not synonyms. They do not describe the same process. They do not operate on the same level. In Parashat Tetzaveh, between Exodus 27 verse 20 and 30:10, both concepts appear, but with distinct functions. And if we do not distinguish between them, we understand neither the priesthood nor the altar. Let's begin with the linguistic root. Atonement comes from kaf-peresh. The verb is lekaper. The noun is kaparah. What is its original meaning? To cover. In Genesis 6 verse 14, when God instructs Noah to build the ark, he says, "You shall cover it with pitch." There is no sin. There is no altar. The root means to seal, cover, protect. Kaparah does not mean to cleanse. It means to cover or neutralize. In the sacrificial context, Kaparah is to cover the guilt, to neutralize its legal effect. It does not erase the act. It restores the legal relationship with God. Now let's move on to the other root. Purification comes from tethiresh. The verb is lidahar. The noun is Taharah. Its literal meaning is to cleanse, to restore a state of purity. It does not cover up. It removes a ritual condition. The difference is radical. Kaparah acts upon guilt. Taharah acts upon a state. In Parashat Tetzaveh, we see both levels. When the altar service is described, especially in Exodus 29 and 30, the blood of the sacrifice is used to perform Kaparah. The blood repairs the breaking of the covenant. It is a legal act. But when we speak of priestly preparation, washings, and maintaining the ritual state, we are in the realm of Taharah. The water does not cover up guilt. It restores a state. We could say it this way. If someone has committed a moral transgression, they need Kaparah. If someone has touched a source of impurity, they need Taharah. A person can be ritually impure without having sinned, and one can have sinned without being ritually impure. These are distinct axes. Kaparah belongs to the realm of relationship. Taharah belongs to the realm of access. The altar requires Kaparah. The sanctuary requires Taharah. And here lies the profound subtlety. On Yom Kippur, for example, there is first Kaparah through the blood, and the final result is to purify them. Leviticus 16 verse 30. First, the guilt is neutralized. Then, the state is restored. Covering is not the same as cleansing. Repairing is not the same as restoring. In contemporary terms, we could say, Kaparah resolves the legal issue. Taharah restores the ontological condition. And this distinction avoids a dangerous confusion, believing that every impure state is sin, or that every sin is resolved with water. The Torah is more precise than our modern intuition. Taharah deals with proximity to the sacred space. Kaparah deals with covenant faithfulness. And understanding this difference is not a minor detail. It is the key to understanding how Judaism conceives of the relationship between God and humankind, not only as abstract morality, but as a structured system where state and guilt, access and covenant are handled with distinct instruments. Because covering is not cleansing, and cleansing is not covering. And whoever fails to distinguish this has not understood the heart of sacred service. If we read Parashat Tetzaveh carefully, we discover something that is not accidental. The dominant verb is not. It is Kaparah. In Shemet 29:36, it is ordered, "You shall make atonement on the altar." And later, In Exodus 30 verse 10, Aaron shall make atonement on its horns once a year. The emphasis is clear. The repeated word is Kaparah. Taharah is not the dominant term in this section, and that is profoundly revealing, because Tetzaveh is not simply describing ritual maintenance. It is establishing the legal heart of the priestly system. The altar needs Kaparah. Why? Because the altar is the meeting point between humanity and God within the framework of the covenant. And the covenant implies responsibility. It implies the possibility of rupture. It implies the need for repair. Here we must be precise. Taharah, from the root, means to remove impurity, to restore a ritual state. It is ontological. It deals with the condition of the object or person. Kaparah, from the root, means to cover, neutralize, seal. It is legal. It deals with guilt and responsibility within a covenant relationship. They are not interchangeable. Taharah removes a condition. Kaparah neutralizes a debt. The primary instrument of Taharah is water. The primary instrument of Kaparah is blood. Water cleanses a state. Blood repairs a relationship. In Tetzaveh, the focus is not simply that the altar be clean. It is that it be reconciled. The altar itself requires Kaparah because it represents the place where the transgressions of the people are processed. It is a powerful idea. Even the instrument of atonement needs atonement. This teaches us that the relationship with God is not magical. It is legal and dynamic. It requires maintenance, repair, and constant renewal. We could summarize it like this. Taharah belongs to the ritual ontological level. Kaparah belongs to the legal covenantal level. Taharah answers the question, what state am I in? Kaparah answers the question, how is my relationship? In Tetzaveh, the Torah is training priests and consecrating the altar. It is building the mechanism that will allow the covenant to be restored again and again. That is why Kaparah predominates. Because the sanctuary is not just a clean space. It is a space of reconciliation. And here is the final teaching. Biblical spirituality is not limited to feeling pure. It demands covenantal responsibility. It is not enough to eliminate impurity. The relationship must be repaired. Tetzaveh reminds us that the focus of service is not spiritual hygiene, but rather a structured reconciliation between humanity and God. And that completely changes how we understand the altar, the priesthood, and our own lives. Let's now look at the contrast in action within the same Parashat Tetzaveh. First, purification. In Exodus 29 verse 4 we read, "And you shall wash them with water." Aaron and his sons must be washed before being ordained as priests. Here, no sin is mentioned. There is no prior transgression. There is no guilt to cover up. There is preparation. The water removes the profane state, the ordinary state. The future priests were in a common condition. The washing does not repair a moral fault. It adjusts their ritual status before entering into a sacred function. That is Taharah. The water acts upon the state, not upon the legal relationship. Now let's move forward a few verses. In Exodus 29 verses 36 to 37, it is commanded, "You shall make atonement upon the altar." Let us pause here. The altar is not unclean. It does not need washing. It has not committed sin. So why does it need Kaparah? Because the altar will be the instrument of mediation between the people and God. And every instrument that participates in the processing of guilt requires legal activation. The blood is applied to the horns of the altar. It is not cleansing. It is legal consecration through Kaparah. The blood is not removing dirt. It is establishing a function. It is preemptively neutralizing the dimension of guilt that the altar will have to handle. It is legal activation. Here we see the difference with almost surgical clarity. Aaron and his sons are washed with water. That is Taharah, a change of ritual status. The altar receives blood. That is Kaparah, legal authorization to operate within the covenant. The water prepares the priest. The blood authorizes the altar. One acts upon a condition, the other upon a function. And this distinction teaches us something profound. Not everything that is fixed in life is fixed in the same way. Sometimes we need cleansing of our state. Sometimes we need repair of our relationship. Confusing the two generates spiritual confusion. The Torah is precise. Water removes the profane. Blood establishes mediation. Tetzaveh does not mix the instruments. It does not interchange the processes. Each acts on its own level. And this precision is not soulless technique. It is a lesson on how the relationship with the sacred works. First, the state is adjusted, then the function is activated. First, one cleanses, then one authorizes. And when we understand that sequence, we realize that sacred service is not emotional improvisation. It is carefully designed spiritual architecture. There is a verse that organizes the entire system. Vayikra 16:30, in the heart of Yom Kippur. For on this day he will make atonement for you to purify you. Observe the order. Will make atonement. To purify them. First Kaparah, then Taharah. The sequence is not accidental. It is structural. When sin is involved, the guilt is first covered or neutralized. Then the state is restored. Kaparah precedes Taharah when the problem is moral. Now let's understand what kind of problem each concept solves. Purification responds to contact with death, to natural bodily processes, to ritual states. It does not imply guilt. A person can be ritually impure without having committed any transgression. Atonement responds to sin, to breaking the covenant, to moral responsibility. Taharah deals with conditions. Kaparah deals with responsibility. Let's return to Tetzaveh. Why does the altar need Kaparah? The altar receives blood daily. It is the point where human failings are processed. It represents the place where the transgressions of the people are symbolically deposited. That is why, in Exodus 30 verse 10, it is established that Aaron will make atonement on its horns once a year. It is not said that it will purify him. It is said that it will perform Kaparah upon him. Because the altar does not accumulate ritual impurity. It accumulates the legal effects of the sin that has mediated it. It needs legal restoration. And here we see something extraordinary. Even the instrument of reconciliation requires reconciliation. That reveals the depth of the system. It is not magic. It is a dynamic covenant. Let us also observe the instruments. Water purifies. Blood atones. Oil consecrates. In Tetzaveh, all three appear. Aaron is washed with water. He is anointed with oil. The altar receives blood. But only the blood performs Kaparah. Water adjusts the state. Oil bestows function. Blood repairs the relationship. Each substance fulfills a distinct function. They are not interchangeable. And here is the final teaching. If the problem is a ritual state, the remedy is purification. If the problem is a moral breakdown, the remedy is atonement. And when both are present, the order matters. First Kaparah, then Taharah. First, the relationship is repaired. Then, the condition is restored. The Torah does not confuse the levels. And perhaps that is the most profound lesson. Not every spiritual conflict is resolved in the same way. Sometimes we need cleansing. Sometimes we need reconciliation. To confuse them is superficiality. To distinguish between them is wisdom. And Tetzaveh compels us to distinguish. When we enter the mystical dimension, the distinction becomes even finer and more luminous. In Kabbalistic literature, Taharah and Kaparah are not merely legal categories. They are processes that operate on different planes of the soul and the cosmos. Taharah restores blocked spiritual flow. Kaparah neutralizes legal accusations on the celestial plane. Taharah is energetic cleansing. Kaparah is legal reconciliation. Imagine the soul as a channel through which divine light flows. When there is ritual impurity, the flow is obstructed, not necessarily because sin has occurred, but because the state is incompatible with a certain level of holiness. Taharah removes the blockage. It reopens the conduit. Kaparah, on the other hand, operates in another court. When there is transgression, what tradition calls an accusation is generated. This is not a childish metaphor. It is cosmic legal language. Kaparah covers, seals, and neutralizes that accusation. It restores the balance of the covenant. One cleanses the channel, the other cancels the debt. And here a controversial implication arises. Modern spirituality tends to merge both concepts. People speak of cleansing guilt as if it were all the same. But the Torah keeps them radically separate. Not everything impure is sin. Not every sin generates physical impurity. A woman in a state of niddah is not a sinner. A person can have lied seriously and not be ritually impure. They are parallel systems that sometimes intersect, but they are not confused. And today, Taharah remains relevant in the practice of the mikveh, in family purity, in conversion, in certain processes of spiritual transition. Water continues to be an instrument of restoring one's state. Kaparah, since the destruction of the temple, is no longer performed through sacrificial blood. Rabbinic Judaism taught that it is now achieved through teshuvah, repentance, tefillah, prayer, and tzedakah, charity. These are functional substitutes for the sacrificial system. But in the temple era, blood was the exclusive instrument of sacrificial Kaparah. There was no ritual alternative. And we return to Tetzaveh. The Parashat teaches us a clear structure. The priest must be purified with water. The altar must receive atonement with blood. The system distinguishes between states of relationship. Taharah prepares. Kaparah repairs. Taharah cleanses the vessel. Kaparah restores the bond. And perhaps that is the most profound teaching for our spiritual life. There are times when we need inner cleansing, to remove blockages, to realign ourselves. And there are times when we must face responsibility, repair relationships, and accept consequences. Confusing them weakens the religious experience. Distinguishing them makes it mature, because not everything is solved with tears, nor is everything solved with water. The Torah invites us to a structured spirituality, where state and relationship, energy and covenant are addressed with distinct tools. And that precision is part of its eternal wisdom. We have explored a system that, at first glance, seems technical, even distant. 7 liquids, hierarchies of transmission, contact, burden, shared roof, purification, and atonement. But what we discovered is not an ancient, irrelevant code. It is a spiritual architecture of astonishing precision. We learned that impurity is not sin. That purity is not a moral virtue. That blood does not cleanse, but reconciles. That water does not atone, but restores state. That oil consecrates, wine sanctifies, milk nourishes, dew revives, and honey sweetens. But not everything sweet belongs on the altar. The Torah does not conflate concepts. It distinguishes state from relationship, energy from covenant, access from responsibility. And that distinction educates us. Because in life we also need to know when to cleanse and when to repair, when to restore our inner state, and when to reconcile a broken relationship. Tetzaveh taught us something fundamental. Taharah prepares. Kaparah repairs. First, the bond is reestablished. Then, the condition is restored. This order is not ancient. It is eternal. If this lesson opened new perspectives for you, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with those seeking depth and clarity in the Torah. Visit us at laymishnah.com, where you will find studies, resources, and exclusive content to continue deepening your understanding. This is Abel Flores, founder of Mishnah TV, signing off. Don't miss the next video.